Authentication and authorization. Two words that sound very similar but do two very different things. Let's dig into it. Yes, hello and welcome to another Cerbos tidbit. This time we're going to look at authentication and authorization. These are two words that you've probably heard a lot. You probably use them today without necessarily realizing it, but they do two very different things. First off, authentication with an N is all about understanding the user's identity and making sure they are who they say they are. Authorization with a Z or a Z for our American friends is actually now understanding what that user can do. Are you allowed to do a certain thing inside of a system based on who you are? But let's dig into these a bit further. Authentication is the one you're probably most familiar with and almost definitely using today in your application. Authentication is all about making sure the person has identified themselves with some sort of credential and you can be certain that person should be who they say they are. So authentication systems generally rely on providing some sort of credential. The most obvious is like a username or password, but nowadays we're obviously all familiar with things like Google login, Facebook login, GitHub login, etc. And what that basically is the system is challenging that person to identify themselves using some credential information, and in return back your application gets some sort of token or a signature that verifies they are who they say they are. And along with that you get some profile information, maybe like a name, an email address, profile picture is kind of the common things. And this is all information you can use inside of your system to make decisions around whether that user can do something. But at that point, you only know the person is who they say they are. You're not doing anything yet to work out whether someone is allowed to do anything inside of your system. And this is what authorization is. So once you know who a person is, you now want to figure out what can they do inside of your system. So authorization is that business logic, those rules that you may have written up in a spreadsheet or a gist or just in the back of your head as you're building a system, and it's the thing that decides this type of user can do this certain action. So you may have heard of the term Abac, roles-based access control, which is the most common form of authorization. And this is where you give each user a role. Are they an admin? Are they a user? Are they a manager? Are they a team member? And inside your code, inside your logic, you make those decisions around, okay, this user is allowed to approve a vacation request, for example, if they're a manager. Or this user is allowed to update an expenses inside the system because they own the expense. And these are kind of the roles that you associate with it. And you typically have your super admin, sudo root, whatever you want to call them, which defines they're allowed to do everything inside of your system, and your least permissive users are just maybe view only users. So that's kind of roles. A more advanced form of authorization, which I'm pretty certain most of you will be doing today, is something called Abac, attribute-based access control. And the most common example of this is if you're ever building a system where a user is creating content. So for example, if I am uploading a photo, I would be the owner of that photo because I'm the one that uploaded it, and thus I should get special privileges on that. Maybe I'm allowed to replace it or delete it, whilst people that are viewing or just commenting maybe not be able to. And that is where Abac, or attribute-based access control, comes in. This is when your code is actually looking at not just the role of the user or some information about the user, but also looking at the actual thing that user is trying to access or interact with. And this is where, in the case of like the photo example, if I'm the uploader, then I have to make sure that my user ID is equal to the owner ID attribute of that particular photo inside of the system, thus authorizing my request. So authentication, just to recap, is making sure the user is who they say they are by logging in with some sort of credential. Authorization is about working out, okay, what can this person actually do inside of the system? Hope you found this useful. This is the first of a series of tidbits from Cerbos as we dig into the different aspects of user control, user permissions, access controls, and authorization. Thanks.